Madam Speaker, after 4 days of intense debate on the Constitutional Amendment Bill, with passionate speeches from both sides of the House, I'm glad there is unanimity for this bill. This is a sign of a healthy democracy, a perfect example that consensus can be reached on issues of national importance. Madam Speaker, there is consensus because this bill is a marked improvement on the existing Declaration of Assets Act. Of course, there's room for improvement, but at least it is a step in the right direction. Madam Speaker, as honourable members has reminded the House before me, it is the third Declaration of Asset Bill that is being debated before this House. The first Declaration of Asset Bill was debated in 1985. Honourable Anil Gayan reminds us that when the bill was debated, the then leader of the opposition, Honourable Paul Béranger, referred to it as a complete eyewash. And so it was. It was a complete eyewash. Why? Because the declaration of assets was not public. MPs were required to file a declaration of their assets and liabilities with the clerk of the Legislative Assembly. That is how it was called, not National Assembly, Legislative Assembly. The declaration could not be disclosed without either the consent of that MP or, if required under the law, but a copy could be disclosed to the Prime Minister and the leader of the opposition. So, under the 1985 Declaration of Assets Act, the general public did not have access to the Declaration of Assets and could not therefore ascertain if MPs, members of Parliament, were using their office for unlawfully enriching themselves. And the MMM, back in those days and still today, wanted total transparency and moved an amendment at committee stage for the Declaration of Assets to be published in the Government Gazette. An amendment which, of course, was rejected by the government, then led by Anur Jagna. The Declaration of Asset Bill in July 1991, Madam Speaker, by sheer coincidence, was debated in 1991 exactly after this House had rejected the Constitutional Amendment Bill in 1991. So, you know, what is a coincidence? L'histoire se répète 27 ans plus tard. So, this Declaration of Asset Bill of 1991 was also an improvement, we have to say, on the 1985 Act, because it required disclosure of the assets and liabilities of not only the MPs, but of also their spouse, their minor children, and grandchildren. But more importantly, perhaps, Madam Speaker, the clerk was required to cause the declaration of assets to be laid before the Assembly in accordance with such direction as the Speaker may give. In 2002, the Prevention of Corruption Act was voted, and there was a consequential amendment. The word clerk was replaced by ICAC, so that honourable members had to file the declaration of assets, not with the clerk of the National Assembly, but with ICAC. But these declarations of assets were never tabled in the National Assembly. So rightly, in May 2011, the then leader of the opposition, Honourable Béranger, asked a PNQ to the Honourable Prime Minister, Mr. Ramgoolam, Dr. Ramgoolam, to ascertain why was ICAC not tabling all these declarations of assets. And the Prime Minister stated, and I quote, consultation, I believe, with Mr. Speaker are ongoing regarding the modalities and specific circumstances that would warrant the issue of a direction from the Speaker. So obviously, the leader of opposition was not happy with such vagueness. And he quoted the Prime Minister and said, will therefore urgent amendments be brought to clarify the situation? Because the whole purpose was for transparency. And what did the then Honourable Prime Minister, Dr. Ramgoolam, reply? Yes, I agree. And he went on to say, I think it should be a small amendment. That was in 2011, May 2011, the Prime Minister then saying that he's going to bring a minor amendment to make sure that ICAC will cause declaration of assets to be tabled before this National Assembly. But what in fact happened?
I would request the Honourable Member whose phone has just to go outside, and I'd request all Honourable Members to switch their mobile phones off.
So, Madam Speaker, I was saying how the Honourable Prime Minister, Dr. Ramgoolam, gave a commitment that he will be bringing a short amendment to ensure that ICAC would deposit all the declaration of assets before the National Assembly. But instead, what happened? Barely 5 months later, we were debating a very important bill, the Local Government Bill of 2011 in December. It was, I remember, a very thick bill, 342 pages. And buried under these 342 pages, at section 165, Declaration of Assets was amended to repeal that very section which required ICAC to cause the Declaration of Assets to be tabled before the National Assembly. That was that was a small amendment. But from this date, Madam Speaker, since 2011, as rightly reminded, as the Honourable Boissaison rightly reminded us, several times members from this side of the House has been asking, not only the then Prime Minister, but also Mr. Mento when he was Prime Minister, and more recently the current Prime Minister, when are we going to have the transparency and make the Declaration of Assets public? So I'm glad that today the bill before this House requires ICAC to make the Declaration of Assets public, except for certain exceptions for cash in hand, balance abroad, and jewelry. But at least it's a big improvement. And I'm also very glad that my friends from the Labour Party have agreed to support that declaration, that public declaration, unlike the former Prime Minister who was having an issue with privacy. If you disclose your asset, that affects your privacy, which is a point well taken in this bill, because here in this bill there is a difference between MPs who has to declare and make it public, and civil servants who don't have to make it public. It is filed only with ICAC. Madam Speaker, I won't dwell long on ICAC, but only to say that there is a real perception out there, not only in this House, a real perception that ICAC is not performing. We spend hundreds of millions of rupees every year. We vote for the recurrent expenditure of ICAC. And what are they belong? What is the result? How many high-profile corruption cases have been tried in Mauritius and, the corrupt being sentenced to imprisonment? They only catch small fries, Madam Speaker. And these days they are the laughing stock, not only of Mauritians, but of all people out around the world. I'm sure that in video gag, they all have this video clip of ICAC chasing, on the motorway, chasing lorries. The primary duty of ICAC, yes, this person in the drug trafficker, the alleged suspect of drug trafficker, on the street, the DCP, not the lorry, the DCP. But it's not the role of ICAC to be like a flick of Miami, and chase cars around. Yes, I agree that one of their functions is combating money laundering, but their primary function remains fighting corruption. I said I won't do a long on ICAC, but just to refute Honourable Ratna when he said that ICAC make an inquiry on everything relating to the government. But then let ICAC come and tell us what happened to the fact-finding committee report on Sampat, on Miss S, who is, I understand, an office bearer of his party, Mouvement Libérateur. Where is the inquiry? Where is ICAC? Where is the ICAC inquiry on the serious allegation made by Mr. Gulfi on Honorable Sir Katali Sudan? I understand that there are not one but several declarations that has been made. The ICAP, by remaining quiet, whether they're doing their job or not is a different matter, but simply by remaining quiet, nourrit cette impression qu'aujourd'hui, on a une ICAP qui est totalement partisan. And this is why on this side of the house, we have raised skepticism about ICAP. But we don't have a choice. At the moment, it is ICAP who is responsible for fighting corruption, and frankly, they are the one who should be receiving and monitoring the declaration of assets. Madam Speaker, let's move to who should make the declaration. We welcome the fact that the list of declarants has been increased to include holders of not only elected office, but also certain civil servants and advisors. Section 4 of the bill requires a declaration of assets to include spouses and minor children. Now, Madam Speaker, bearing in mind that the people that we are targeting, the top civil servants, the CEOs, they are of a certain age. Even when we look at, honorable members of this August Assembly, how many of us, I do, I have minor children, but how many of us have minor children? So it would have been more appropriate if we had gone back to the situation as it is today, which is when you make a declaration, you make the declaration for yourself, for your spouse, for your minor children, but also for your minor grandchildren. Because then it's too easy, you just, any assets that you acquire, you don't put it on your name, you put it on the name of your grandchildren. And also with respect to spouse. That was in the law. It is in law in 1991. No. What is required in the law is if you transfer asset. If you transfer asset. No, but if you are receiving bribe, come on. Do you really think that people who are corrupt are stupid? Do you really think that someone who is corrupt is going to put the asset in his name and then transfer it to his grandchildren? Of course not. He will make sure that the money is transferred directly to his grandchildren. If the grandchild is not in Mauritius, so that there is no trace, no one can find it. That is so obvious, And if you had to declare the assets of your grandchildren who is a minor, then at least, it would be a deterrent for people to try to, move assets or ask people, the corrupt, to put the asset in the name of the grandchildren. The other amendment that could have been brought, Madam Speaker, is in the definition of spouse. We are an evolving society. We have to realize that not all elected members, not all declarants, believe in marriages. Some have, what in England we call common law spouses, In Mauritius, we call them conjugal partners. I'm not inventing it. I'm not talking about, mistresses, boyfriend, or whatnot. I'm talking about, a term that is defined in the Prevention of Corruption Act, conjugal partner. So someone who, au vu et au su de tout le monde, vivent comme mari et femme. Donc, I think, just limiting ourselves to spouse will, in fact, ignore a lot of paramour, which may not come under this definition of spouse. It's a good thing that the new law covers chairperson and CEOs of state-owned enterprise and statutory bodies. But then maybe, I think Honorable Duval said so, maybe we should extend that to also fully owned subsidiaries of these bodies. And the example in mind is, the subsidiaries of CB, because the law was amended to provide that the CB subsidiaries fall outside the purview of the Public Procurement Act. So maybe the intention is there. It's a good intention that we are covering public bodies, enterprises, but maybe that should include also the fully owned subsidiaries of these enterprises. And Honorable Jahangir referred to people sitting on bid evaluation committees. I agree with him, although the Honorable Attorney General say that already most of these people will fall under this purview. I think that it serves, there is no harm in, clarifying the law. And of course, Madam Speaker, I don't expect the Honourable Prime Minister today to come with an exhaustive list of all the declarants. I'm glad that under Section 3, subsection 1E, in the definition of declarant, or those people who are required to make declaration, there is a catch-all provision, such other person as may be prescribed. So the Prime Minister has the power by regulation, to amend the persons who have to file declaration, and I'm sure that he will give due consideration to eventually, on case to enlarge the people who has to make a declaration as and when required. Next, Madam Speaker, is what assets need to be disclosed. Again, a welcome step. The list of assets, is more comprehensive than what is in the 1981 Act currently. In fact, Madam Speaker, when the first declaration of asset bill was being debated in 1985, the MMM, through Honourable Béranger, had moved for an amendment that the asset should also include fixed deposit accounts. But in those days, the government was opposed to that disclosure, and this is what Honourable Anirudh Jagannath, as it was then, said. It will really be a burden to impose upon anybody the obligation to reveal all his bank transaction, income and expenditure from day to day. Quite a lame excuse, but I'm glad that the new Prime Minister is taking a more avant-gardist interpretation on what needs to be disclosed. And so in the definition of asset, we need to disclose not only cash in hand, but also any cash in bank accounts in Mauritius and abroad. Yes, well, in those days we only had fixed deposit. Yes, time has changed. but then again, I'll bounce on that. If time has changed, then why are we limitatively defining assets? Are we, it would have been much better if we had a catch-all provision, just like we had for the declarant, who has to make a declaration. So if the assets, there's a list of assets, it is limitatively set out in the bill. There is, I think, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 type of assets. So we can have a 9th category, or such other assets as may be prescribed. So that the Honourable Prime Minister, if he feels, there is new assets that need, because times are changing, that has to be included, we don't have to come back to Parliament and have a new debate, a new amendment. By way of regulations, he can amend it. Because it is clear today, under Section 13 of the bill, regulation, the Prime Minister may, for the purpose of this Act, make such regulation as he thinks fit. Any regulation may provide for extending the application of this Act to such other category of person or officers, but not to such category of assets. So I think this is something that even at committee stage, the Honourable Prime Minister may consider moving to give himself the power, the flexibility of changing the assets, because as he has rightly mentioned, today we live in an era of technology, of digital assets, and it's always too easy to get around this bill by investing in cryptocurrencies, in e-wallet, in digital assets, in bitcoins. So but I agree, and it is not feasible, it's not possible to imagine an exhaustive list of assets. So that is why I would urge the Prime Minister to give some consideration to the possibility of coming up with this, or such other asset as may be prescribed. And short of this, if we really want to cover all assets, then why not have a generic term? Or such other asset, the value of which exceed a certain amount. It can be 1 million rupee, it can be more than 1 rupee, less than 1 million, but at least all the assets. If, for example, you have paintings. If I decide to buy a painting which is worth 1 million, 2 million, 10 million rupees, I don't have to declare it. I don't have to declare it in this. So what I do is, I want to be corrupt, and I just have to ask someone, instead of giving me money, giving me shares, just giving me a painting, just give me a work of art. So too easy to get around this, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, there is one provision, and I think this is a very serious problem with this bill, and that is Section 5, subsection 2A. Section 5, subsection 2A provides, and I quote, "A declarant shall, in relation to a declaration made under Section 4, not be required to specify the value of the asset included in the declaration, except where such asset consists of cash." Now, I can see the rationale for not requiring someone to go and carry out a valuation of his assets. Especially if it is asset which is not in the market or something he has inherited. So I can understand that genuinely, in good faith, the people who come up with this language had in mind to avoid the inconvenience, disproportionate inconvenience that maybe goes to the declarant. But the unintended, and I say unintended, I hope it is unintended. What is the unintended consequence of this bill, Madam Speaker? The unintended consequence is, today, I have 100 shares of a company. My company is worth 100,000 rupees. So I file a declaration, say that I have 100 shares in company X, or partnership X, or trust, whatever. Then, being, corrupt, I tell the person who gave me bribe, instead of giving it to me, put it in the bank account of my company. So after my 5 years in office, when I file my declaration, I'm still going to write 100 shares of company XYZ. But the value of that company has changed from 100,000 to maybe a couple of million rupees. Trop facile. And the people, the public who is going to look at it will not see, anything. Now, if that company is stupid enough to invest in immovable property, then yes, I can understand, you'll go to the conservator of mortgages, to the registrar companies, and you find out what property has been acquired. But, I don't underestimate corrupt people. I'm sure that they will never put any asset in the name of a company whose accounts are disclosed and can be inspected at the registrar of companies. If they have to, if they are bent into beating the system and engaging in illicit enrichment, what do? They will go to a jurisdiction which provide opacity about the company. Just like in Mauritius, whenever a foreigner set up a global business company, the books and records of that business company is confidential. No one, not even one of us here who goes to the register of companies, can know what are the assets, liabilities, accounts of a private global business company in Mauritius. But Mauritius is not unique. This system exists, all over the world. We don't have to travel far. We just go to Seychelles, create a company in Seychelles. We know that, ICAC or anyone cannot go to Seychelles and find what asset that company has. In this way, we're just bypassing. Trop facile, Madam Speaker. Trop facile to get around this problem. And I've given the example of company. What about trust? We don't have mention of trust here. What about trust? Trusts don't even have to file accounts. Even domestic trusts in Mauritius don't have to file accounts. They don't have to file accounts. Yeah. No, but I'm telling you because I know that's how the system works. I know how it was the system. People from the outside, as I said, it's probably very unintended consequences. But it is so easy, too easy, to get around this declaration of assets. And you would not be committing any offense, no false declaration of assets because your asset is still 100 shares because the law no longer requires you to disclose the value. What is the situation today? The situation today under the existing Declaration of Assets Act of 1991, which is the same as under the Declaration of Assets of 1985 requires every MPs to file a new declaration whenever there is an increase or decrease in the value of his assets of more than 100,000 rupees. It doesn't matter which asset. It doesn't matter whether you have bought a car, you have bought an immovable property, or you have acquired another asset. The filing of the declaration is not linked to the type of assets you acquire. It's linked to the value of the asset. Because this is how you know if someone is unjustly, unlawfully enriching himself. But today, trop facile, Madam Speaker. Trop facile. You don't have to, to declare that there has been an increase in your net worth, net asset worth. So that is why I will, again, I've pointed only one example. There are many examples. There are many examples of where you could probably beat the system. So one way of avoiding that, Madam Speaker, is to make it a requirement for all elected members, whether it is councillor or MPs, to file a declaration of asset whenever the value of his asset exceeds any threshold. It used to be 100,000. If we want to put it 1 million, if we want to put it 5 million, we can put it whatever figure we were, but at least have a figure so that whenever someone's asset has increased, he's bound to file a new declaration asset. That is the only way I can think of where the ICAC will be able to monitor that the wealth is rising and falling. Madam Speaker, I gave one example of how you can beat the system. The truth is we cannot today envisage all the situations where a declarant can bypass this bill. I have myself not had time to think about this bill. We were more concerned about the constitutional amendment bill. It's only last night that I started thinking about ways of beating, of how, some of the weaknesses of this bill. But in my humble opinion, Madam Speaker, the only way you can really have a deterrent is when you make it an offense and you increase the penalty. So I'm glad that this bill increases the penalty, the fine, from 50,000 rupees to 1 million, and the term of imprisonment from 2 years to 5 years. It's a good start. But I think we should have gone further. Madam Speaker, if we go back to 1985, and that is the last point, Madam Speaker. If we go back to 1985, when the bill was before the House, the MMM, through Honorable Béranger, moved for an amendment. In those days, we just had the Commission of Inquiry report of Mr. Goborden. Mr. Goborden, who, he did a commission of inquiry on allegation of fraud and corruption. And the Honorable Prime Minister, Andrew Jagnat, had reported to have said that he will implement all the recommendations of the Goborden Commission of Inquiry. So at the first opportunity, the Honorable Béranger, then leader of the opposition, moved for an amendment. He said, are you prepared to implement the recommendation of Goborden Committee? And this is one of the, this is paragraph 9 of the report, one of the recommendations. And I quote, it is from Hansard. I recommend that legislation be passed to make any minister or public servant guilty of corruption if he or any person on his behalf is in possession or has, at any time during the period of his office, been in possession of assets and property not commensurate with his known source of income, unless he satisfies the tribunal set up by the Prime Minister that he has acquired all his assets and all property through legitimate means. We are in 1985. We don't even have the Prevention of Corruption Act of 2002. We don't have ICAC. And here you have this gentleman recommending that we make what effectually is the offense of illicit enrichment a criminal offense. Of course, the government of the day rejected that proposal. Honorable Prime Minister, Honorable Gayan, and other honorable members referred to the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. Are the honorable members, ministers, honorable ministers aware that Article 20 of the United Nations Convention Against Corruption provide, and I quote, subject to its constitution and the fundamental principle of its legal system, each state party shall consider adopting such legislative and other measures as may be necessary to establish as a criminal offense when committed intentionally, illicit enrichment. That is, a significant increase in the assets of a public official that he or she cannot reasonably explain in relation to his or her lawful income. Just like Mr. Gobardon, just like what Mr. Gobardon recommended, back in 1985, so is this United Nations Convention telling us, recommending to make illicit enrichment a criminal offense. And it's not just the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. The African Union Convention on Preventing and Combating Corruption also recommend to make illicit enrichment a criminal offense. Article 8 of that convention, which is entitled Illicit Enrichment, provides, and I quote, subject to the provisions of the domestic law, state parties undertake to adopt necessary measures to establish under their laws an offense of illicit enrichment. So earlier this year, Madam Speaker, I sent a PQ. The Honourable Prime Minister was not here. The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister, who was then acting Prime Minister, replied. So my question was very specific. Is Mauritius intending to incorporate this illicit enrichment as a criminal offense in our laws? So that was a PQ which I sent on 17 April 2018. And Honourable Colin Davelu stated, and I quote, it is not therefore proposed to criminalize the act of illicit enrichment in our law, hence our reservation on Article 8. Why? Why is it not proposed to criminalize? He said, and I quote, because doubts have been expressed on the constitutionality of such an eventual proposal. Madam Speaker, let us say it loud and clear. Even if we need to amend the Constitution, the amendment will support an amendment of the Constitution which would make illicit enrichment a criminal offense. Because a declarant cannot simply get away with it. They cannot be left off the hook. Honourable Attorney General mentioned the Integrity and Good Governance Act. Yes, we have made it a civil case for confiscation of unexplained wealth. If you're too rich, you can't explain where you got this wealth, the agency can apply for a judging chambers for an order to confiscate this wealth. But this is, just a civil remedy. You're just taking away the proceeds of the crime. But you're not sanctioning him. You're not fining him. You're not putting him in prison. So this is why, Madam Speaker, I think that the time has come for us to take a step further and criminalize illicit enrichment. Madam Speaker, intervening on the first Declaration of Asset Bill in 1985, Honourable Reza Uteem referred to a credibility gap that has to be bridged to restore the confidence of the public in politicians. In those days, the impression among the youth was that ministers and the political class were jouisseurs and voleurs. Unfortunately, as Honourable Boissezon rightly conceded, not much has changed. The youth of this country still have a very bad impression of politicians. Not all politicians, but probably most politicians. Today we talk about money politics, make for, gain for. And all too often, Madam Speaker, politicians forget that they are here to serve the people, to serve the nation, to serve the country, not to serve themselves. C'est pourquoi, Madame la Présidente, j'espère que ce projet de loi servira de mise en garde à tous ces politiciens et fonctionnaires qui seraient tentés d'abuser de leur position. Et espérons que ce projet de loi, Madame la Présidente, aide à redonner ses lettres de noblesse à la classe politique de ce pays. Merci.